baby, I'm satisfied, even if you're not just mine.
much. Thank you to everyone who just purchased a glass of wine. You have allowed us to break even for the evening, so thank you. And also, thank you to everyone who has made it out tonight. I know that it is quite cold, and this program has actually been oversold. So please give yourselves a round of applause for joining us this evening and braving the wintry weather. Thank you, thank you. My name is Salvador Munoz, and I am the Director of Public Programs here at Poster House, which is, of course, the first and only museum in the United States dedicated to the art and history of the poster. Yep. Thank you, thank you. Yes, usually people do clap at that part. Tonight it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program, Afro-Futurism and Nike. This program was actually created by our wonderful, incredible, talented assistant curator of collections, Esperanza Humphrey. Our wonderful, talented, creative assistant curator of collections, Esperanza Humphrey. And when she pitched this idea to me, it was immediately, yes, absolutely. Go forth, do it. Because one, make some noise if you here are a fan of Nike. Make some noise if you are a fan of Afrofuturism. Exactly. I too am a student of Octavia Butler, huge fan of Afrofuturism and Nike. I thought that this was such an incredible and unique take on this exhibition. So tonight, Esperanza will be in conversation with Dominique Norman and Victoria Dade. Nice. And I could stand up here and go on, but you all did not come here to see me. You came here to see our brilliant panelists. So I'm gonna go ahead and hand it off to Esperanza to finish introducing the program. Please give a warm welcome to Esperanza Humphrey.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out in the cold to listen to Afrofuturism. This is the worst weather in the world. I hate it. I want the heat wave back. But that's not the point of today. The point of today is to talk about Afrofuturism and Nike. And I'm joined by two amazing panelists. I do want to say that I also really appreciate the refreshing perspective of this program, and it's kind of the brainchild of something Victoria and I were working on. I feel like since the summertime, right? So it was hot outside when it started. It was hot.
Yeah. You had just come back from Cuba, I think.
Well, everyone, I went to Cuba in July. So I really appreciate this refreshing perspective. And then Dominique, thank you so much for us in this as well. So to start things off, just so that we get the formal definition out of the way, Victoria's kind of going to give us this definition that she put together for Afrofuturism. Pulled.
Yes, I'm going to read all of this text that's on the screen, but it's a pretty comprehensive definition of Afrofuturism given to us by scholar Yatasha Womack. And she says, Afrofuturism is a way of looking at the future and alternate realities through a Black cultural lens. Black cultural lens means the people of the African continent, in addition to the diaspora, the Americas, Europe, etc. It is an artistic aesthetic, but also a kind of method of self-liberation or self-healing. It can be part of critical race theory, and in other respects, it's an epistemology as well. It intersects the imagination, technology, Black culture, liberation, and mysticism. An artistic aesthetic, it bridges literature, music, visual arts, film, and dance. As a mode of self-healing and self-liberation, it's the use of imagination that is most significant because it helps people to transform their circumstances. Imagining oneself in the future creates agency, and it's significant because historically, people of African descent were not always incorporated into many of the storylines about the future.
And I think this is really helpful to start off and kind of give everybody this base level idea of what we're going to be speaking about today, because it can get a little thick. So you came to Poster House, so let's first talk about the posters. And I think that it's important to know, and this is why I wanted to start this way, Nike, for anyone who's been in this gallery before, and you can kind of just look to your left or to your right and see what's going on the walls. It's important to identify that Nike doesn't set out to make a racial statement about, like a radical statement about race or identity. They're not like, oh, we're gonna be at the forefront of social justice and all of this, so we're gonna put Black athlete. No, they were seeing that they wanted to make really fun posters with their cool products, which are sneakers at this time, and they wanted athletes on the posters, and the athletes, most of them happen to be Black. And I think that in the title, just frame it how Nike turned sports stars into superheroes. That's really important because these are sports stars turned superheroes, and Nike is kind of getting that credit for that. So I never want to give Nike too much. Nike doesn't set out to like really do a thing when it comes to race. We're just lucky enough to start to think of it more racially. We're thinking about the communities that these posters are in, the people who gravitate to certain athletes, Black and brown youth, and how they're interacting with sneaker culture. So a couple months ago, we had a talk on that. Was anyone able to make it to the fashion talk about sneakers? Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. So you know that we already had that conversation. So now we're kind of looking at a future that never was, or maybe a future that could be. So the inspiration for this starts with this Iceman poster. I've said this 101 times, and I thought I would change it, but it hasn't changed since the exhibition got on display in September, I think. This is my favorite poster of the exhibition, and you probably noticed it from like our socials. This is George Gervin for Iceman. Does anyone know why he was called Iceman? Anyone know? He was cool under pressure, so they nicknamed him Iceman. And in I believe this is 1978. I believe this is 1978. They positioned George Gervin on real ice. So this is real ice. If you kind of look to your right, everyone, the poster is right there. There we go. Salvador is modeling right now. We have George Gervin on this ice. He's sitting on real blocks of ice. It's covered by a thin sheet of like plastic. Word on the street is that he had to sit on that for several hours. And when the posters were made, thousands were printed. And the story goes that they were handing them out to people, but over time, he ended up having like a trunk full of these posters. So he would just randomly be like, you want a poster, anyone? But the reason why I'm inspired by this poster for this particular event is because when I look at this, I start to think about this future, like this Black future. And so first thinking about colors, like you see these cool tones and these metallics, that's gonna be a really important part in the aesthetic of Afrofuturism. And also this idea of frozen in time as a means of preservation. So when we think about like, what does this future mean? What does it mean for like who we are today and how we manifest ourselves in the future? We're preserving like our sense of self, or maybe this moment of ourself for the future. And I mean collectively and individually. So there's Iceman. Oh, and he's wearing blazers. Hello, blazer. He's wearing his blazers. You're gonna see blazers in some other posters throughout this exhibition too. The next poster that was really inspiring, an inspiration for this event is the Air Force One. So this is the inaugural poster for Air Force Ones, arguably the most like enduring sneaker of Nike. And we have all the players photographed in front of this helicopter, or at least it says it's a helicopter on the label. That's a helicopter. The Air Force Ones were high on the ankle, and they had a Velcro strap, and that was because it was meant to prevent ankle injuries. It did not prevent ankle injuries, everyone. High top sneakers are not gonna prevent an ankle injury, but that was like the technology of the time. But again, thinking about Afrofuturism, like space, we're thinking about that technology, space and technology. The empowerment in the unknown. When you go to space, that is the unknown, but also we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And so this is kind of that a really important part of that inspiration for Afrofuturism. I also put flight as a representation of transcendence. And then lastly, the poster that inspires this event is Imagination by Michael Jordan. Has anyone ever seen this poster before today? I feel like it's a popular poster. Is anyone familiar with the Jumpman poster? Okay, that's back there. Jumpman is how we know our like Jordans today as the Jumpman position. But this is advertising the second iteration of Air Jordans. And the reason why they're called Air Jordans is because Nike actually didn't think that having a player's name would sell the sneaker. They didn't think calling it the Michael Jordans would sell any sneakers. And Michael Jordan actually preferred New Balance, or like he was like, okay, whatever, Nike. But Nike was the only one that was gonna give him his sneakers. So to advertise the new Air technology in sneakers, they called it the Air Jordan, because they thought that would sell more. Little do they know, Michael Jordan ends up being the reason why a lot of us gravitate to Nike. But I like this one because, again, we're thinking about color. It's cool tones sandwiched between the warmer tones. So you have the hoop and the basketball as the warmer tones and the court warm. But between that, we have those cool tones. An imagined future and then embracing an infinite range of possibilities. That's what I think about when I think about Michael Jordan, like an infinite range of possibilities. Even in the poster behind us, Victoria and Dominique wings, that lives beyond the year that it was created. And I think it's Michael Jordan really represents this idea of Afrofuturism. So enough about posters. Let's get into the overview of Afrofuturism now that we've thought about what inspired this event.
So part of this overview of Afrofuturism includes an Octavia Butler quote, because you can't really talk about Afrofuturism without talking about Octavia Butler. Often people will refer to her as the mother of Afrofuturism. And if you don't know Octavia Butler, she is a Black woman who was an author and wrote Afrofuturist texts, science fiction especially. And so this quote from her says, "I never bought into my invisibility or non-existence as a Black person. As a female and as an African American, I wrote myself into the world. I wrote myself into the present, the future, and the past." And then here I put together this word cloud of the really common words that pop out in various definitions of Afrofuturism. And as you can see, it includes words like Black liberation, self-healing, artistic, aesthetic, imagination, future, African descended, alternate, transform. These are just some of the really common words that show up in all the different definitions of Afrofuturism. And to sort of give a more like succinct definition of Afrofuturism, there's essentially three main components to it. The first is this engagement with futures, new worlds, science fiction. The second is the centering of Black culture in the African diaspora. And then the third is healing and liberation. And so for futures, new worlds, science fiction, I have this image of one of Octavia Butler's books. It's called Xenogenesis. It's actually a series. It's really good, but it's science fiction to a T. Like, people go to space, there's aliens, there's spaceships, like there's weird like gene splicing. People are speaking Swahili. It really fits all of it to a T. So I have that up there. And then for Black culture and the African diaspora, I have this comic book image of Black Panther, which people might also be familiar with the Marvel film Black Panther. And also related to this topic of superheroes, Nike turning super sports stars into superheroes. Comic books are a really fascinating medium for Afrofuturism. There's so much that can be done with comic books in creating different universes, multiverses, rewriting history, alternative histories, visual, all of these different aspects of it. And yeah, Black Panther, again, if you don't know, he's a superhero. He is from a fictional land in Africa called Wakanda. And Wakanda is kind of like an imagination of what African countries could have been like without colonization, because their whole thing is that they have been hidden from the outside world. And then this third piece here on healing and liberation, I included a piece of music. So this is an album cover from the group Parliament Funkadelic. They are also known for really pushing this Afrofuturist idea in their music, in their imagery, in their fashion. And this album cover I thought really spoke to the healing and liberation piece, because here it says one nation under a groove, and everybody has come together and is unified under R&B that's represented by this Pan-African flag with the red, black, and green. So yeah, just some examples to help you better familiarize yourself with Afrofuturism, what it can look like, the different mediums it can take on. And then I just have another Yatasha Womack quote, because they're a really amazing scholar when it comes to Afrofuturism. And so they say, Afrofuturism is a way of looking at the future and alternate realities through a Black cultural lens. And all these things do that. And these are some posters, some Nike posters that they're not in this show, but they are posters that me and Esperanza talked about when we were sort of brainstorming how can we connect Afrofuturism with Nike? What does Afrofuturism have to do with Nike? What does Nike say about the future? And you can see.
There were some scary ones, everyone. Don't go down that rabbit hole, because it gets real weird real quick.
Yeah.
But these are okay. Oh, this.
All right, so let's get into the styling of Nike and Afrofuturism. As we've looked at the previous examples, we also inherently need to talk about the Jumpman, right? The Jumpman poster, the Jumpman pose, and the mythology that is kind of created out of Michael Jordan being positioned as this superstar, superhero with supernatural abilities. That curation of that narrative was very intentional from the very beginning, right? From the time that he signed with Nike in 1984, and then the production of Air Jordans in '85. So again, this curated narrative that Nike put out of Michael Jordan, and therefore by proximity, Jordan's sneakers carry this supernatural ability. So I also want to tie in the ways that Nike really leaned into media as this tool of communication, right? We're at Poster House, we're looking at media through the format of posters. And this is something that Nike really tapped into, especially with Michael Jordan and the promotion of Air Jordans. So we see the ways that the value of Air Jordans dramatically increases. And a big part of their increase in value was with the campaigns, the early campaigns that also featured figures like Spike Lee. That is actually my favorite section of the exhibit, is the Spike Lee posters that were also donated by Spike Lee. So shout out to Spike. So this campaign comes out in 1989, and of course this is following in the footsteps of Spike Lee's first feature film, She's Gotta Have It, that comes out in '86. So that's, just 1 year after Air Jordans are released. So Nike really leans into this kind of cross-cultural promotion of featuring Spike Lee, embodying his character from She's Gotta Have It, his character of Mars Blackman, who at the time is also really kind of representing like Brooklyn streetwear and especially sneaker culture. He's obsessed with wearing sneakers at all points in his activities in his daily life, right? If you've seen the movie, you know what I mean. So they really tap into that character of Spike Lee being sort of the epitome of the sneakerhead and the primary customer for Air Jordans. So this campaign comes out not only in poster format, but also in multiple commercials where they have Spike, again, embodying his character as Mars Blackman, saying to Michael Jordan, what makes you the best player in the universe? It's got to be the shoes. It has to be the shoes. So What also is interesting about this collaboration is the ways that Spike Lee's films have really served as some of the earliest depictions of Afrofuturism in film and on screen, and really central to the ways he leans into that Afrofuturistic aesthetic is the really intentional integration of music, hip hop, street style, and social justice. So we can move to the next one. This is, I think, my favorite poster of the exhibit. I think mostly because I'm a fan of Spike Lee. I'm a big old fan of Little Richard. So this campaign actually comes out in 1991, but again, following into the same narratives that were put out in the first commercial with Michael Jordan, Spike Lee, Mars Blackman. So in this commercial and poster, it depicts Mars Blackman, again, wishing to be like Mike and asking this genie, who is embodied as Little Richard, to grant his wish to be like Mike. And then Mars Blackman transforms into Michael Jordan, still stylized as Mars Blackman. So I think this example particularly really embodies the intersection of fashion, of film, of music, and sports, all of which that are lending itself rather to this styling of Afrofuturism. So not only in Nike advertisements, but throughout media. And if we take, for example, other collaborations with fashion, film, media, we can look to the example of Ruth Carter, right? The incredible costume designer who has worked on several Spike Lee films. And I think most notably, her costume design for Black Panther won her not one, but 2 Oscars. So her work has really brought Afrofuturism to the screen, has brought it to life through styling. And I think this collaboration with Spike Lee, with comic books, with the Afrofuturism as media, as film, music, fashion, etc., is really evident in this particular example. So that is the sort of future that Nike is imagining in the mid to late 80s and early 90s. But what is the future that becomes sort of realized, this Afrofuturistic future? How does it kind of change in its imagined example versus the realized example? So we can argue that films, even like Space Jam, could be an example of Afrofuturism. But one film I wanted to talk about in particular is the 2002 film Like Mike. If you are a child of the 90s and 2000s, you remember, you, like me, may have even had a little crush on Lil Bow Wow and absolutely love this film. They're playing basketball. Yeah, yes, okay. So the interesting thing about this film is that the character of Lil Bow Wow, his name is Calvin. He is an orphan and he is getting bullied in his group home, and he just stumbles across a pair of donated shoes that are actually Nike Blazers. And he sees the initials MJ on the shoes. And he's like, oh my God, these have to be Michael Jordan shoes. And so he gains this extraordinary, supernatural-like ability to play basketball through just wearing these shoes. And then all of these other things come to fruition. He not only has this supernatural ability to play sports with these shoes, but he then gets signed to the sports team that's in the film. He is now the youngest and the shortest player to ever be signed to the team. And he is gaining all this wealth and fame, and then by the end of the film, spoiler alert, he gets adopted by the other kind of main character, the like central player on this basketball team. So all of his dreams come to fruition. He gains wealth, happiness, fame, a family, right? All by having these shoes and wearing these shoes. So the shoes start to reach a point where they now have become larger than life and are seen as this wish granting, again, tying back into the genie as Little Richard, granting all of your greatest desires. But then how does that narrative of this item that becomes larger than life and this symbol of, again, wealth, fame, fortune, etc., how does that kind of lend itself to a negative turn in the ways that we perceive the symbols of this arguably utilitarian item? So first, I think we can think back to the shoes first being banned, right? The Air Jordans being banned from being showcased on TV, and then how that creates this anti-establishment narrative around the shoes. One quote that comes from Scoop Jackson in the documentary A Man in His Shoes. He says that the shoes were anti-establishment, referring to the ban creating this narrative, and that the hood is inherently anti-establishment. And it's like they were made for each other. So we start to see a rise in violence in obtaining these shoes, right? Getting jacked for your sneakers, and then ultimately being killed for your sneakers. So this cover from Sports Illustrated is from 1990, saying your sneakers or your life. And it focuses on the ways that, of course, they primarily focus on quote unquote urban, quote unquote inner city, which we know translates to Black and brown youth, leaning into violence to obtain these symbolic representations of cultural capital. So it's important to remember that fashion has always served as this tool to visually communicate things like wealth and cultural capital, status, right? And the ways that Black and brown people historically have always used fashion and street style to navigate social justice, to negotiate social relations. So I want to also think about the ways that Nike, again, unintentionally creates this vision of Afro-Futurism, and then how this symbol becomes sort of larger than life, and then how those narratives of Nike as this symbol and violence start to become intertwined. And again, the narrative, the stereotype of Black and brown people being plagued with violence, where does that start to sort of take a turn in what we imagine as Afrofuturism? So that brings me to the next slide. So out of curiosity, I will admit, I am not someone who's super familiar or comfortable using AI. I am a little bit more on the side of humans, creatives should be making creative works. So I, out of curiosity, asked AI what they imagine as Afrofuturism. So I literally typed in Afrofuturism as the prompt to Google's AI generator, Gemini. They created this image, a double-barrel gun with a noose attached to the handle. again, the only prompt that I gave this AI generator, this Google AI generator, was the word Afrofuturism.
We had the same reaction, by the way.
Yes.
We were like, what?
Literally jaw on the floor for a good 5 minutes. And I was like, I have to talk about this. I have to talk about this. So, you know.
Sure, here you go, too. It's that for me. Like, yeah.
Here you go. Here's Afrofuturism. So I can't help but wonder, where is AI getting this narrative from? Where are they getting this imagery from that this is what they come up with for Afrofuturism? They didn't give me Black Panther. They didn't give me Octavia Butler. They didn't give me outer space. They gave me a gun and a noose. Incredibly distressing, again, especially as conversations within creative industries like fashion, like media, are really plagued with the question right now about what purpose AI serves in our future. So this is something to, I guess, sit with, because I don't have the answers of why AI thinks this is what Afrofuturism looks like. But I think it really speaks to Victoria's point earlier about how Afrofuturism also includes healing and liberation, right? And how that is often removed from the depictions of Afrofuturism that we often see. We can go to the next slide. So I did want to include a more modern example of Afrofuturism in the comic book world, in film, in media, and its collaboration with Nike. So the example of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse from 2018, the character of Miles Morales being the first Black and brown depiction of Spider-Man, the first non-white Spider-Man, and the way that, again, they really leaned into streetwear and Nike shoes for this film and for the promotion of the film with Shameik Moore, who voiced Miles Morales. So I kind of wanted to end on, can we remove this supernatural, wish-granting, all-encompassing idea of what Nike shoes can do for you, and rather think about what we are doing in the shoes, right? It's not about the shoes, it's what you do in them. Michael Jordan is famous for saying that. So I, of course, had to include not only modern examples of people who have accomplished incredible things like Serena Williams, like Colin Kaepernick in Nike, but also this sort of imagined future of diversity, of equity, of inclusion, especially since those topics are that part. I don't even have the words. So the ways that is depicted in earlier examples of Nike advertisements, like the Supreme Court poster and the It's a Whole New Ball Game with the female basketball players, which are both in this back corner. And depicting what is possible in Nike, again, not granting superhuman abilities per se, but what you can potentially accomplish in Nike. I think that's it for me.
Thank you, everyone. So we have time for questions. Another microphone? Or you want to use, yeah, take mine. I don't need to talk anymore.
Questions? Okay. I have one too, but I'm gonna wait.
I was wondering what you know about the copywriting on Nike's ads and how that's informed by the people who are doing that writing, and kind of just, I guess, more of the conceptual side of the creative. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, the way I'm gonna answer that is, if you look around this gallery and look at our design of this gallery, you will not see a Nike swoosh. That's for a reason. We will get sued. So our design team did this incredible design to mimic the swoosh, I think it's better. But we really had to be thoughtful about, if we're talking copyright, we had to be thoughtful about that. Now, if you're asking more about the creative team behind Nike, there are different photographers that are going to be labeled through the gallery. Chuck Kuhn, I believe that's how you say the last name, is probably most prominently featured, I feel like. And you can kind of see the difference between his photography style than, like, I think it's Bob Peterson, some of the other parts of the gallery. So these creative directors, again, are not setting out to make a radical statement about Nike. They are throwing things at a wall and seeing what sticks. That's literally what the curator of this exhibition, Adam Howard, writes in the text. They're throwing things at a wall and seeing what sticks, because there's no rhyme or reason for what they think is going to sell for Nike. They're putting these sports stars and hopeful that a good design team is going to get it off the ground. I also want to mention that they are working on a budget, and we know this because posters like this, all of these players, the photographer dressed them all up in judges' robes, but these guys were like 7 feet tall, and so their ankles were probably going to show. So he had his wife take the hem out of the bottom of the robes. If you look really closely, actually, I think that they had to wear like black socks, because it didn't even cut it, even if you took out the hem. And this was just happened to be a very cloudy day, and so there's no CGI. There's nothing, like, there's not too much going on in terms of like the post-production of this. They really are authentically capturing these moments, because they're on a budget, because they don't really have much to work with. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
I just want to clarify that I meant copywriting, not copyright.
Oh,
Like
copywriting. I have.
So sorry. We dealt with the copyright issue for this exhibition for many, many, many months. So like we hear
I'm
copyright
sorry.
and we hear Nike, and that's exactly where our
I
brain
get
goes.
scared. I'm like, no, don't worry, it's not a swoosh. But no, I have no idea about the copywriting. Sorry.
I have a question inspired by the AI Afro-Futurism slide. I was fortunate enough to attend an artist retreat 2 years ago, and one of the sessions that they had was about art and AI. And nobody wanted to go. But when you're at a retreat, you can't let a host not have anybody in their session. So a few of us went. And although I approached it very skeptically, the speaker's main point is that if Black folks are not participating in the generation of AI images, then they are leaving it to other folks to decide what those images are, which is why you have a lot of negative representations of Black folks in AI-generated imagery. And he thinks that it's like a part of folks' responsibility to engage with the tool, otherwise they get left out. So do you have any thoughts about sort of like that perspective? It's something that I struggle with a lot as like a practicing artist, and like very skeptical and hesitant around AI, but I also understand the value of not being left out of those contemporary conversations.
I absolutely agree that I approach it with skepticism, but like I'm open to learning. I especially approach it with skepticism when we see what we saw. But I think, yeah, we can't. I think it's important to be in these conversations to then be able to challenge them as well. So because AI is going to be a part of our future, that means we all need to kind of contribute to what that future can look like, to see more appropriate representation. Because if someone who is not me is looking at this image, someone who is not Black is looking at this image and thinking, oh, so that's Afrofuturism, like that we need to be actively challenging that. Absolutely. I don't know if that fully answered your question, but yeah.
And is this on? I have some suspicions on like why that image is the way it is. Like, one, I think that the guns comes from the Black Panther Party and like their imagery with guns as well. I just have some feeling that the AI was like Black Panther, Afrofuturism, Black Panthers, guns. Now we have this thing. That's just like one suspicion of mine. But I also think it's really, really telling that the AI's response to Afrofuturism is death, because that is kind of the reason why we have Afrofuturism, is because in our mainstream white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal society, Black people don't belong in the future, not even as servants. We get replaced by robots. And yeah, AI responding with death is just another way to like reaffirm that Black people aren't meant to be in the future, and Afrofuturism is just so necessary because we will never go away. So it also seems like it's kind of up to us to create our futures and write ourselves into the future, like Octavia Butler.
Hello. Since we're talking about suspicions, this isn't really a question, but I do want to piggyback off of that. And I first want to thank you for the AI image, because obviously I saw the gun, but I didn't even notice that it was a noose on the end of it. I just like kind of ascribed it as like random string. But definitely in the case of suspicions, I don't think it's by coincidence or happenstance that it's a gun, it's a symbol of violence, it's a symbol of death, and even pushing that further to what Salvatore was kind of explaining earlier. The suspicion is it feels like a game of catch up, because there is a lot of human interaction that has to go into AI before it reaches us as a consumer. So for us on the what is essentially the back end to now interact with it enough to reprogram it, I feel like that's going to take a lot. I also think there's a lot of distrust because of things like surveillance and data accumulation and things of that nature. But I think it also speaks to the people that are curating and researching, programming, facilitating a lot of these things, because we've talked about different sorts of AI and like the lack of Black presence when it comes to sensors or motion sensors or something like that. It doesn't evade me that an image of Afrofuturism lacks a person. And I feel like had it just been futurism or like a future USA, there would have been multiple people involved in that image. But just to have Afrofuturism devoid of life itself feels very intentional of how we are not viewed as people. We are not viewed as living things. We are viewed as assets, commodities, a means to an end, a labor force. It's like, that seems very intentional. And I guess my skepticism would be like, I don't see what amount of interaction we can have to undo that and then go into the Black.
Thank you. Very astute observation.
I have a question here.
Yes, thank you. Where? Raise your hand. Real high. Okay. You and then you.
I was just curious, maybe like either what examples of Afrofuturism really excite you all, you three, right now, or like what would you personally like to contribute to Afrofuturism?
You want to go first?
I have a lot. I know. Yeah, there's a lot that I'm really excited by. Janelle Monáe, all of Janelle Monáe's work. Even like when I went to the Renaissance tour, the visuals on stage, where I know she hasn't given us visuals, but the visuals from the tour were like very Afrofuturist, and even her voiceover, she's talking about like expanding her being and her consciousness and traveling to different spaces. And Solange also has a lot of stuff like that. I guess I'm just listing musical stuff. Music, I guess I feel very inspired by the Afrofuturist musical artists that are around. And then I'll also just plug my favorite book series, Children of Blood and Bone, or the Legacy of Orisha series. It is so good. I just highly recommend everybody read these books. That's all I'll say. Read the books.
In the similar vein of music, Doechii, I'm obsessed. I am obsessed with Doechii right now. I think everything she's doing, from the fashion to the hair to everything, is. Mm, mm. I would also say Telfar. I think Telfar's social media, their visuals, just their use of media is really, really innovative and very camp and very of the culture, by the people, for the people. Yeah, so I would say those two in particular really, really excite me.
Should have gone first. Up until recently, I lean more into Afro-pessimism. Because, I'm just a scholar. No, I mean, everything both of you just said, but I like the small aesthetics of Afrofuturism. So that's why I kind of started with like the colors and the metallics. And I just like to see how, like, when we started this, we were talking about like Y2K McBling and all that other, right? Like,
And like the Missy Elliott visuals,
and TLC was kind of
album
where we started.
covers,
Yeah, we were thinking about that, and I always like to see how that's like repeated or manifested in today, but like done in a more like contemporary way. And so I think I lean to the past to dictate the future, and so I think that's a good place. I see.
Hello. I'll try to make this quick. But like I'm sure several people in this room, I've written on Afrofuturism. And when I took my pass, it was when Black Panther was out, and I think there was a big resurgence, and everyone was talking about it. So one of the ways I positioned my paper was looking forward, oddly enough, to the effects that resurgence, that trend, all of, the kids that went to see Black Panther, the ones who were affected for the first time and got into space more, how that would pan out in the future. And so listening to you all talk about, Nike's responsibility in the space, is kind of blowing my mind. But how do you see this kind of panning out? Like, are they an agent of change, an agent of chaos? And I know it's almost, impossible to even speculate on at this moment, but I saw, I don't have the best, I'm not the most optimistic about, sports stars and whatnot, but then I see images of Serena and Colin, and it's not all bad. So how do you all feel about that?
Good question. Really good.
Well, I think it's interesting what Esperanza was mentioning kind of towards the beginning, that Nike did not intend to make a statement, right? That they were, like you said, just throwing things at the wall, seeing what stuck. So initially, they didn't start out as like the activism brand. And I feel like that's something that's rebranded in recent years, especially with Colin Kaepernick. I think it's always important to question corporations and the ways that they contribute to capitalism as a form of violence. I think we can, I don't know if applaud is the right word, but like we can give them some semblance of credit of making a statement in a time where making statements is detrimental to the brand, detrimental to the people involved in making any sort of political statement or statement about social justice. But at the end of the day, they are a corporation who are still exploiting people in various ways. So I think it's very much a double-edged sword in that way. Yeah.
I would also add that the Nike that we're seeing in this room is not the Nike of today at all. Like Nike today is so different, and the like I don't know, I wasn't alive when these were around, but like this is a different this is a different era of Nike, and the Nike today is walking in Fashion Week. The Nike today is with the card, like there's a mass consumption, overconsumption. There's this glitz and this glamour around Nike, and I would not see them as an agent of change. But what I think we can do is look to these types of posters and say, like, this was a time, and they didn't set out to do a thing with race, but there was a time where Nike still had that like room to make mistakes or to experiment. Spoiler, I was saying this earlier, but there's only, I think, 4 posters with women in this gallery. If you look around the walls right now, I promise you half are already in this part of the gallery. And I think that that's an issue. And even though we see Serena on the posters today, in what ways does Nike really address gender and really address all the isms, I guess? And I don't know. I would say no, they don't, and not effectively, at least. But yeah, but also what brand does? Like, does anyone know? I'm asking. What brand does? I don't think so.
I'm going to be a bad host again and interject myself into this conversation. But I think that, like, to Esperanza's original point, right, Nike did not set out to create positive representations of, like, Black people, but really what they're doing is, like, adapting their advertisement to the personas that the athletes themselves are developing, right? So my favorite poster in this exhibition is Daryl Dawkins' Chocolate Thunder, who, if y'all don't know Daryl Dawkins, he is one of the first NBA players to be drafted out of high school, the first to dunk and shatter the baseboard on the basketball hoop. But he was very eccentric and claimed to be from the planet Levtron on a mission to spread interplanetary funk. So for his poster, right, he's featured here with the broken blackboard, the shattered, and this Planet Levtron jersey, right? So it is not Nike that is promoting Afrofuturism, right? It is the Black embodiment of Afrofuturism that Nike is then capitalizing on. Okay, again, I'm not a panelist. I'm just a loudmouth.
Wait, I do want to interject because that's a really good point. Now I'm going to piggyback off of Salvador. If you look really closely at the posters with the basketball players, it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of an Easter egg, but I feel like I should say it. The players will tie their sneakers backwards, especially the Blazers. You'll see it a lot on the ones with the Blazers, and that's because they were tapping into Black and brown communities and seeing that, like, oh, this is how the kids are doing it. And so you'll see that on these posters. So again, they're not directly saying that they want to make a racial statement, but they're leaning into that. Like, that's why they're thoughtfully tying one sneaker to the back. And we kind of do that with the Blazers on the wall back there. One of them is tied to the back to kind of think about, like, I guess pay homage to Black and brown youth who were doing it at that time. Who did that? Who was alive in the 80s doing that, or the 90s? Nobody? Okay.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Oh, it's not really a question. I was glad you brought up the funkadelic aspect, because my first exposure to all of this didn't have a name like that. It was with Africa Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Force, and you should have seen the get-ups they were wearing, which then transferred into the graffiti images on the trains, like the glasses and so on. So it was a broad, along with Pan-Africanism, way back. And so we're dating it. I think Octavia Butler started publishing, late 70s? So this would be like 78 to 82. So just throw that in and I think that precedes Nike. So I'm just wondering what the real sources for the Nike program begin.
Big audiences, y'all got me running back and forth.
I guess it might be a question, but it's more of a thought as well. how am I situating this? So basically, I'm curious if you guys have looked into the creators of these images, whether it's the photographer or like the creative directors, especially because of the time period. So, I know Dominique because we're professors and things like that. So I'm curious if you did that research of like the history of what's going on, but also the people creating the image, because it very much obviously feels like this, I don't know, white view of like Black masculinity and this idea of commodifying the Black body, right? And I don't know, that trope of like Black men only being, able to do sports and not other things that are like intellectual and all these other stuff. So I'm curious who the people are that created these images. I haven't gone through the thing yet, but and also maybe in the future, I guess, what do you think maybe the future could be for creating those images? Like, who's actually creating it? Who's having a say in putting these images together? Because otherwise, it's just like this fantastical kind of fetishized version of Black men and some women, as you say. Yeah, so that's my question / statement.
I can answer the first part. I encourage everyone to, well, we're closed, but so you can't walk around right now, but after this, but come back and really like kind of sit with this exhibition while it's still up. It closes February 23rd, everyone. But so I mentioned earlier 2 photographers. Some of the labels do talk more about like the creative direction and all of that. I know that the curator, Adam Howard, works in media, and so he would probably be way more helpful with your question for the first half. But I will say they are mentioned on the labels, and just like with this event, the Afrofuturism, it doesn't really need to be laid out, I think, for us to kind of pull the parts of this that really need to be dived into for us to really investigate. So if that is something, and I think that it is something that we should all kind of think about, like that hypermasculinity, it just so happens that a lot of these sports stars, these superheroes are Black men. It is something to really start to question and maybe to tap into like further research in terms of documentaries or whatever you decide. But Adam Howard was very thoughtful in including a lot of the information about like photographers and design on the labels. I'll allow you to sneak some pictures at the end if you want to take some. And then the second question, I don't remember what it was, but.
I mean, I think it really speaks to even what was being discussed about like AI and, who is behind the creation of these images and being involved in that creative process. In my humble opinion, I think the examples with Spike Lee, because Spike Lee is a Black creative who is, kind of contributing to the conversations of Afrofuturism. I think the way that those images are curated are a little bit different than the ones that have maybe a white photographer, a white person at the head of creative direction, et cetera. So yeah, the way we kind of interpret Afrofuturism through a non-Black lens, I think does need to be questioned of who is creating these images and where are they obtaining their information about Afrofuturism from, like we saw with the AI example, like where are they obtaining these messages from to inform the creation of these images? Yeah.
There's one more question in the front.
And before we get to this question, I just also wanted to offer, I think you should check out these images in the back of, I think it's the Supreme Court and then also the boardroom. Those are 2 images that really struck me when we were walking through this today, because I was thinking about this like connection between Black men and sports being the only way to achieve success, but then they're depicting these people in these positions of power that are normally reserved for white men, and just it's interesting. It really grabbed me. So I just would suggest that you check those out too.
It's impressive that Nike wasn't thinking about that.
Just to, I think, Esperanza, you were talking on earlier, love to hear you guys love to hear y'all speak a bit more about what you're seeing currently. We can focus on Nike as it talks through depiction and the future. As of now, the last couple of years, there's a lot more focus on women's sports. So Play Like a Girl had a big campaign, and we're seeing multiple WNBA stars get their prominence in addition to Serena, Coco, and others. So what are you seeing now as it relates to the future as we depict it today?
I'm not seeing it in Nike. I'll say that. I mean, Converse is owned by Nike, right? Maybe, I don't know. I'm not seeing it. I don't know. I would have to think about that a little bit more, because I think that, again, if we take like the aesthetics of Afrofuturism, maybe that's what I'm seeing more today. So if we're thinking about like these moments, like before the Super Bowl, we're going to get a bunch of commercials. If I were to watch all those commercials nonstop, I have other things to do in my day. But if I were to do that, I think I could grab pieces of these elements of Afrofuturism, but I don't know if they're going to be making a statement the way we're trying, like with what we're doing today. I think it'll just be, I don't know. I think it'll just, it looks good. It looks really good. And I think that that's enough. And I think that that's enough for Nike. And I think that's enough for a lot of brands. It just needs to look good. I don't think we're going to get like this deep analysis in a lot of brands. And I don't know if I want brands to do that. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, like I don't think I'm looking to Nike right now ever. I'm not looking to Nike to do that type of work.
I'd love a future without advertisements, personally. Sorry, I know that's controversial, but
Yes, I completely agree.
Okay, I have like a half-baked sort of question. Okay, the future is sort of dictated by the past and the present, and with Afrofuturism and where we are, it's all kind of in kind of that context of posters and selling a product. How would that be handled in like an Afrofuturist perspective of like not selling yourself?
I think that the core piece of Afrofuturism that often gets lost is the healing and liberation piece. I think a lot of people focus on the Black people in the future and metallics and space and aliens, whatever, but then they lose that healing and liberation piece. And so, like, if the product isn't going to help you heal and liberate yourself, then like it's not really something worth having, or even something worth like advertising or putting a lot of money into to like promote it in that way, I guess. But yeah, my thought just immediately goes to the healing and liberation piece, and that being crucial for something to truly be Afrofuturist.
And that kind of relates to the question from the back. Like, I don't look to Nike to heal or for anything. And I'm only speaking for myself, obviously, but like, I think that there's a more critical way to do this type of work. And to be honest, going to a museum, we were talking about the Met, like the has anyone been to that little Afrofuturist exhibition? Like, that could be healing for people to be in a space like that, as narrow as it is, to be in a space like that. And like, Octavia Butler as like your comfort book or your comfort piece. Like, I think that there are other ways. There was Lovecraft Country. That was a TV show. Some people liked it a lot. Okay, Shaquille liked it a lot. Like, I think there are other ways that we can get this information or get that healing. And I don't know if Nike's the place. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's kind of hard to just look at a poster and feel healed too. Like, there's something about the medium. Like, yeah.
But
yeah.
Long May She Reign with Billie Jean King, that is such a warm.
I mean, yeah, if someone can do it, then power to them, you know?
Oh, no, I guess. I mean, yeah, that's something I'm really kind of sitting with in the way the world is moving right now, is like, how can I heal and liberate in the context of the time and space that we're in, when I can't just like zap myself off to Mars? Like, what does healing and liberation look like right now? Right now, it's not contributing to capitalism and hyper consumerism. It's engaging with these kind of conversations. It's engaging with Black creatives. It's a lot of Erykah Badu. It's a lot of watching Telfar videos and thinking about like what healing and liberation looks like in real time, in practice, outside of capitalism. Because I definitely question like healing as something to be consumed. Like the self-care industry is like something to kind of be questioned. Like how you can just purchase healing. I don't think that it doesn't quite work that way. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm leaning into right now. What does my Afro future look like?
All right, y'all. I know that you have more questions, and I would be more than happy to stay here all night and talk Afrofuturism, Nike, fashion, and everything. Unfortunately, we have only booked our panelists for the hour, and we have reached that time. I'm sure that they'd be happy to answer your questions after, but please give them a warm, warm round of applause. And before we close out tonight, please also give a warm, warm round of applause to our event producer, Shaquille Bailey, who, without his hard work, none of tonight's event would be possible. In fact, none of our events at Poster House would be possible, so thank you. Just Frame It, How Nike Turns Sports Stars into Superheroes is on view at Poster House through February 23rd, so see it while you can. Thank you so much for coming out.